Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast, sponsored by the IBCA. We are a global podcast that shares the passion for the coaching profession. You will hear the stories of coaches from all around the world. We are covering the profession in game, outside of the game, and anything in between. As always, thank you for listening. We look forward to sharing the coaches' stories with you. All right, we are back with another episode of the After the Timeout podcast. Today, we are very lucky to be joined by Michael Costa, head coach at Whitman-Hanson High School. Coach, thanks for joining us this morning. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So we like to start every episode with the opening tip. It's just kind of our opportunity to let our guests kind of talk about their current program and their coaching journey. So if you just want to give our listeners just a little bit of a inside scoop into your program and your journey through coaching.
So I started coaching. I think this is actually my 10th year. I started in 2014. Um, prior to getting into coaching, I played high school basketball, I played college basketball, Division III, um, and I had kind of taken a weird path to where I am now. I'm a special ed teacher at the school that I coach at, but I did a bunch of things coming out of college. It was tough to get a job back then, back in 2008. Um, so guys that I had played college with, had asked me if I would be interested in a volunteer role at a local high school. I live in East Bridgewater, Massachusetts, which is about 40 minutes south of Boston. And that was the school that was looking for a volunteer position. So I jumped on it just to get back into the game. Um, and in 2014 as the boys volunteer assistant for the varsity team there. And we were able to have some success. I think we reached the state tournament for the first time since I think it was 2002. Um, and then from there, Whitman-Hanson, where I'm at now, but on the boys' side, they were looking for a paid assistant. So I jumped on that opportunity as kind of like the head assistant over there for the boys' team. And I think that was in 2015, 2016. Um, and we had a lot of success on the boys' side. I think we won like 90 something games in the 5 years that I was there. We won, back to back sectional championships, went to play at the Boston Garden. Um, so the coach that Bob Rogers, who's also my athletic director, he was the head coach there. He's been the head coach there for probably 20 plus years. He's still pretty young, so I knew that he wasn't going to be going anywhere anytime soon. And we had a lot of success with league titles and sectional titles. And our girls position had opened up. Um, so I jumped on that. And actually, I think it was like a blessing in disguise because, excuse me, around the same time that it opened up, like me and my wife found out that we were going to be having our first girl. So I was like, oh, it's in the cards that, I should be coaching girls basketball. So um, made the switch. This is my fifth season, I should say, um, as the girls varsity coach at Whitman-Hanson. And, it's been great. It's been awesome. I love coaching on the girls side. I think we're going to get into, the differences between the girls game and the boys game in a little bit, but we've been really successful over these first 5 seasons. Um, Obviously, playing through COVID, that was like a shortened year, so that was kind of weird. But I think we played like 11 games. Um, but I think our overall record right now is like 70-22 or something like that. In the 5 seasons we've won this year, we won our third straight league title. Um, we're currently in the state tournament right now. We play Tuesday in the Sweet 16 in our state tournament, and in 2022 we made it to the Final Four. We won. We went like 22-3, which was the most wins in school history for the girls' side in a season. So it's been a good 5 years. The group of girls that I've had, or actually all the girls that I've had in the program, just they work really hard. They want to get better. They want to learn. And it's kind of like it's been the key to our success because everybody's buying into what we're trying to do, um, and it helps. So that's kind of where I've been at. I also do a little player development training business that I started during COVID, like a lot of other people, when we were just kind of stuck in our homes. Um, so I do that, in the off season. I've done some stuff in the AAU game, but I kind of eased my way out of that and just kind of focused on developing kids and developing players. So yeah, that's my story.
That's awesome. That's a lot of success for such a young career, and that's awesome that you were able to put in those positions. I want to talk about in like the kind of beginning, right? You play, you get done playing ball, right? You're done with school, and everybody loves a volunteer coach, right? If you say you're volunteer, that's the magic word, right?
Yep.
Um, but were you kind of sure that's what you wanted to do at that point when you're volunteering, or was it, like, hey, I'm gonna see what this is all about, and then kind of when did you decide, yeah, this is the life for me?
Well, I think, being a basketball player, you have that itch, right? Like, and then when it's all done, it's like, all right, so like now what? Now what do we do? You're used to being in the gym all the time and um, being around the game, and when it's done, it's like, all right, I guess I can play in some men's leagues and stuff, but like, there's no real like end prize, right? Like, yeah, you might win like a T-shirt or something after like the session's over, but um, I had kind of started to go towards like the educational route at the time. Like I was a paraprofessional in a behavioral special ed school. So I knew that wanted to get into teaching, and then it was kind of just like all the stars kind of aligned. And um, my good friend James Smith, who I played, growing up with and played against in high school, he had reached out to me. So I went to like a couple open gyms, met some of the kids. Just saw it as like an opportunity to get back involved with the game and try to pass on some things that the coaches that I played for um, had shared with me, and just try to share my knowledge. And then um, once I realized that I was gonna be the volunteer coach and help out, like I was all in. Like I would go scouting and do all the things that we like to do as coaches, right? Um, and just kind of just instill in the kids that because they hadn't really had success, and just try to before that 2014 season, just kind of like show them like what it takes to be successful, like how you prepare and do all those things that can get you to where you want to go as like a team. And once we had that and we show, and it was kind of cool, I'm sure you guys have witnessed it yourselves, like it's almost like that aha moment. Like you're going to practice every day with these kids and you're seeing them develop and you're seeing them get better, but like they don't really believe it yet. And then when they finally get over that hump and they're like, just like the joy that they have, that they, you know, in our case, they had clinched the state tournament, something that hadn't been done. And it's like, well, now it is possible. So now, like, I think every year, almost every year after that, um, they, were vying for tournament berths and league titles. And it was just kind of like, because the town, East Bridgewater, they were majority like a football town. So they had athletes, but they didn't really have basketball players. So we were taking those football players. We were like a great defensive team. Like we would be physical and tough and beat you up, but we struggled to score the ball. So it was like, all right, well, if you got the defense, so now we got to, develop you as basketball players. And um, I think right now, actually, one of the kids that, well, not a kid, but one of my buddies that was on that staff, he's now the head coach there. And he's done a great job. Like they've, qualified for the state tournament in 4 straight seasons since he took over the head job there. So just kind of changing that culture. I think just seeing the impact that we can have as coaches on kids um, is just something that really stuck with me, and was like the reason why I just keep wanting I kept wanting to do this. So when that job at Whitman-Hanson opened up, I jumped on it.
So you'd kind of mentioned your COVID, I guess, player development business. And Todd and I kind of started this podcast during COVID. I think we all kind of found our little niche during COVID. But Todd and I talk about player development all the time. And there are so many things out there about player development, so many coaches and so many things on Twitter and so many things all over the place about player development in the right way, the wrong way, and the every other way. So, what are kind of your thoughts with so much material out there, kind of how to shrink and condense and find the right things to develop your players?
Well, I think, for me, I mean, everybody, has their own style and, as the consumer, right? Like what do you want? Like what do you want to improve at? Everybody's got these, social media obviously plays a huge role right now in like player development. You see, all the drills and see the mixtapes that kids are putting out now and all like, hey, look at me, look what I'm doing. Like look at, the tools that I'm using in my workouts, whatever it is. Um, but I think for me and like what I stand for is just trying to get you better. Like the fundamentals. Like I think the fundamental part of the game is just so lost right now. I think um, you know, what I focus on and emphasize with my kids is just, being able to play off two, like play off 2 feet, be strong with the ball, like make shots, right? Like if you can make shots, you're gonna play, right? At a high level. So like all my workouts, like that's what we start off with. Like each kid, we go for an hour. Each kid is gonna make 150 shots to start. Like just working, working inside out, Mikins, like doing all those sorts of things, catch and shoots, one dribble pull ups. Um, I don't focus on like, the step backs and all like the, side step threes, all that stuff. I just focus on like, let's make shots. Like, can you make a catch and shoot three from the corner? We'll focus on ball handling. We'll focus on footwork, like different types of finishes. But I think for me, it's just, um, you know, being a player at the college level, like I know what it takes to be able to play in college, and I know, if you can do, X, Y, and Z, if you can guard the ball, if you can contain, you can guard, you can make shots, you can handle the ball and not turn it over, like there's a spot for you. So those are the things that I emphasize, with my kids. Just being solid.
So I'm gonna follow that a little bit. You mentioned it, right? Because everything you see a lot of times is like it's like instant gratification. Oh, I did this double crossover, a step back, right? I feel I've always said like if I had an AAU team, nobody would play because it'd be the most boring, simple thing ever, and it's hard for people to kind of to see that, even though maybe some people parents have experience with basketball. So how do you how do you get them in that mindset of those fundamentals and kind of like you said buying into it, because we all know that's what wins basketball games, right? And simplicity a lot of times is better than these fancy moves because you use those what 1% of the time, right? So how you get the buy-in on that when you're training people?
And I think a lot of it too is like I think a lot of like my clients right now are like middle school kids to high school. Um, the higher level stuff, that's all, the high level kids that can do that sort of thing, right? And you can't get to that point unless you've mastered the fundamentals. And like what I preach to like, my girls and like my teams is like boring wins. Like sorry about it, but like boring wins. Setting good screens, boxing out, being able to, shoot the ball off the catch, like that wins. Um, the other stuff, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to say like, you can't be successful if you're going to do that because obviously you can, but if you can do it the right way. Um, so, I mean, I guess, to start when I started this business, and even still, like people don't necessarily want to train with me because like I do the boring stuff. Like I don't do the flashy stuff. I don't post on social media at, for every session. You know what I mean? Because like that doesn't mean anything. That has no value to me. Like, you know what I mean? Like you're a youth player. We're trying to get you better so that when you get to high school, like you can get recruited. You know what I mean? So um I just think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I try to separate myself from that. I don't try to, you know, put stuff on social media just to throw it out there. Like with my higher level kids, like I do that. Like I have some of my former players that playing at the Division 3 level. So like I'll shoot some film during the session and throw it on the page or whatever. But um, I don't do it for clicks. Like the clicks and the like things. Like that's a big part of today's game, I guess. But I don't do that. I just want kids to get better, and that's something, and that's what I preach to the kids.
He's a man after my own heart, John. We've had this we've had this conversation so many times. It's all right. So you have along the way you've won the Assistant Coach of the Year award, right? And it's a tough time, at least here in Illinois. There's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of coaches maybe not sticking in for a long haul, right? So it's hard to find good assistants, right? But what makes a great assistant? Maybe on the basketball experience side, like you had, or someone who maybe wants to try it and learn, a young person that's coming in, but maybe doesn't have as much basketball experience.
So I think it's twofold, right? So I think for me, coming into my situation with Whitman-Hanson on the boys' side with Coach Bob Rogers, like we had a relationship. Like he actually had coached me when I was in seventh and eighth grade. Um, so like we already had a relationship. So um, he told me right from the jump, like anything you see, go for it and speak up and correct. And he's like, and if I disagree with it, then I'm gonna step in and I'll correct it, to what I want. Um, so I think as a coach, as a head coach, and you guys can probably agree to this too. Like if you see something, say something. Like if you see something on the court, like as a head coach, like I'm looking at 9 or 10 different things on the floor. Like I'm not always focused on a certain aspect of what's going on. So if you see something like, hey, so and so, is matched up with, number 10, maybe we should switch that. Okay, let me know. And then as the head coach, I have the final say, right? Um, but the biggest thing that I tell like my staff is like just don't sit in silence. Like um, we had a situation in our first round tournament game last week, um, where we had a matchup that wasn't going in our favor. We had this girl that was posting us up, like seemed like every chance she got, and I had called. Well, I didn't call up, but I had a girl on my bench, who kind of swung for us a little bit, JV and varsity minutes this year. And my thought didn't it didn't run through my mind to like put her in. Um, but then after the game, I'm like, dude, damn it, like we should have played her because like she could have given us at least a couple minutes to bang down there and to I know for a fact the girl that was killing us wouldn't have done what she did if we had just put her in just for a couple minutes. So like that's what I sent to the group text after the game to the coaches. I was like, hey, like I'm kicking myself right now because we could have put so and so in to really help us and we missed it. So moving forward, like I'm gonna need you guys to kind of remember this so you can bring it to my attention. Like because again, like we were up 15, things start to go south, they're making runs, and then it's like the whole like state tournament vibe, right? Like up here comes a comeback, they're gonna knock them off. We were playing a lower seed, so as a coach, like you're trying to you know get the reins, get the hold on the game, and like I wasn't even thinking about putting her in. So I think as like an assistant, like you just gotta you see something, say something. If something pops in your mind, because I think a lot of young coaches that want to be assistant coaches at first, right? They eventually maybe want to be a head coach. So like as an assistant, that's like you want to kind of put your head coaching helmet on, like when you're on the bench in the game, like, all right, what would I do right now? You know what I mean? And try to play that game. Um, so I think that's the biggest thing right now. First and foremost is like, don't sit in silence. speak up if you see something. And you may not always, be right, but the head coach will, he has he or she has the final say, right? So if you don't say anything, then as the head coach, like I don't know what you're thinking too. The other thing I would say is just be super loyal, um, like to the public, right? To the public eye, be super loyal to your head coach. And then behind closed doors, like if you disagree with something, like always do it behind closed doors. Don't ever let like your players see, the clash, right? Um, so loyalty, I think, is a big thing. Um, and just go above and beyond. Do like all the little things. Do the extra things like scout games, scouting report. Make sure you're putting your input in on it. Um, in practice, like make sure you're having an active voice, so the players, see that your voice carries weight. Because like that's another thing too. Like I've had assistants, um, or been around assistants that kind of show up, go through the motions in practice, don't really say much, and then when it's comes game time or halftime, and we just got punched in the mouth in the first half. It's like, oh well, we should have been doing this, or after the game, like, oh well, we should have did that. Well, okay, well, where were you? Like, you could have said something, right? Or if things are going south, and they're telling the team like, you guys got to be doing this and this and this and this. Okay, am I really going to listen to somebody that doesn't have a voice in practice and doesn't help us prepare? Like, how can I take what you're saying at face value when you know you're not really there, you're not really present, right? So um I think that's the biggest thing is just um the speaking up, being loyal, doing all the doing all the little things, and then also too, like, and at least I know on the girl side, like being a male coach, um the girls might not always discuss things around me because I'm a male. So that's why, like, I try to have a big female presence on staff so they can kind of, have a pulse on what's going on, and just making sure that like any issue that needs to be brought up, make the head coach aware of, so we can kind of figure things out.
I think those are all really good examples. I really liked when you talked about the one who's kind of quiet, but then when things go wrong in a game has all the ideas. So I know this
Yeah.
was something you wanted to really discuss, was just some of the differences in coaching girls versus boys basketball. So I don't want to form too much of a question about this because I don't want to pigeonhole you, but what are some of the differences or things that you had on your mind you wanted to discuss?
um well, the first thing is like when I was on the boys side, the last season that I was the assistant there, our girls job had opened up, and my head coach was like, oh hey, just so you know, the girls job opened up. he's like he's like, do you want it? He's like, 'cause if you want it, like, you should apply. And I was like, well, yeah, I'll think about it. And then um, he's like, oh no, you wouldn't want that job. And I'm like, well, maybe I would. So like I thought about it, and then like I said, found out that like my first child was going to be a girl. So I was like, you know what, let's just go for it. And the first thing that I was asked is like, well, what's the difference between coaching girls and coaching boys? And I was like, to be honest, there is no difference. Like, cause I coach the girls the same way that I coach the boys. You know what I mean? Like we do the same drills, we do the same stuff. Like there's maybe a certain way that I need to communicate. Like I think I need to communicate things a little bit differently, um, on the girls' side than I do on the boys' side. Um, but in terms of like basketball and like X's and O's, like I don't do anything different. Um, there's definitely certain things like that boys can do that girls just can't, right? Like you in terms of like athleticism, right? So like you're not seeing at least in Massachusetts, like at the high school level, you're not seeing any girls going up and throwing it down, right? So obviously the athleticism piece is a little bit different. But in terms of like, um, skills and stuff, like I teach it the same way. Now, it might take the girls a little bit longer to master a certain skill, but I don't deviate in terms of like the instruction with the boys and the girls. The other like main thing is like the officiating, at least that I've seen. It's been more glaring this year, I think, than in years past. But I think obviously in Massachusetts we have like a shortage of officials. Like we just don't have as many officials officiating anymore. Whether that be because the criticism of like parents or whatever from the stands. So this year, like we had a lot of instances where our refs were pulling double duty. Like I'd be getting JV officials on like for the varsity games, and it's just such a drop off in terms of like the quality of the game. Um, the most recent example was we were playing a team. Actually, we were in first place. This was before we clinched the league title, but it was a big matchup, us versus Duxbury, who was in second place. And I think we were either 1 or 2 games up on them, and it was at Duxbury, and it was the same situation. Like one of the refs did the JV game, and like it's almost like an AAU vibe, right? Like you got these refs that are refing back-to-back games, and eventually, I mean, it's just natural, right? Like you're probably losing focus at some point. You're not on top of your game, and I just think that. And I actually, after the game, like I had written to the referee assigner, and I just said, "Hey, listen, like I'm not one to, you know, make excuses about referees and why we lose a game because that's not why we lost the game at Duxbury." I said, "But just in terms of like the optics of the game, you have the top 2 teams. This is a big matchup in terms of like um, where the league title is going to fall, and you have a ref that's pulling double duty." I said, "There's zero chance that that would happen in the boys' game." Like you would have like if Whitman-Hanson boys was playing Hingham boys and the 2 teams were fighting for the league title, there's zero chance that a referee would be pulling double duty in that game. There's no chance. And then he tried, and of course he's not going to say that I was right, but he was like, "Oh, like I'm offended that you would say that, blah 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 blah." Like, and I'm like, you're not gonna first of all, it was through email, so I'm like, "You're not gonna admit that in writing that, that would be the case." But it's just not, and then, like, I even, like, I talked to other boys coaches, I'm like, "Hey, how many times, this year have you had officials that are doing JV and varsity games?" And there may be, like, certain circumstances, but they're, like, not often, like, maybe once. It seemed like every other game, like, the girls' side was getting JV officials, and it's just not okay, like, because then it's just so inconsistent, like, it's just so inconsistent, and it's frustrating, and the players get frustrated with it too, and um, it's just not a good look, I feel. Um, those are, like, the two big things, like, I think the officiating and how the girls get officiated, I think, is way different than the boys, like, there's situations where like, I have a freshman on my team right now, very athletic, and, like, she is one that can she can touch the backboard, like, she can get up, right? So she's in these games, and she's blocking shots because she's jumping higher than, other girls, and then the girls, like, fall down on the ground, and it's a clean block, and the ref's like, "Foul," and it's like, "Why is it a foul?" Because she, like, fell on the ground? Like, it's just hand checks, like, it seems like recently, like, hand checks in the girls' game are always getting called, and, like, that's, like, my thing that I say to officials, and I'm like, "Would you call that in a boys' game?" And they're like, "Well, this isn't a boys' game, this is a girls' game," and I'm like, "But it's the same game." So, like, you're not letting girls play through contact, like, but you let boys play through contact. Same thing the other night. We had a three-man crew, which is great, like, I love having 3 officials, because usually we only have two. But like one guy's calling all these hand checks, and the other two officials aren't calling anything. And it's like, as a player, like how can you adjust to that? Like how can you adjust to a referee that's calling, all these ticky tack fouls, but then the other two are letting you play? It's like, it's a state tournament game. Like you would think the officials would be like, hey, state tournament game, like let's let them play a little bit. But it's just so inconsistent, and it's like it's frustrating because I just don't think that the girls get officiated the way that the boys do.
Oh man, he's just preaching to our choir again. You're on fire, coach. You're definitely on fire. All right, so we want to call this halftime adjustments. I didn't really know what I was going to ask here. I was going to kind of see how it went, but I just saw an interesting tweet. And you played Division III basketball, and I think I coach Division III basketball. John's coached Division III basketball, JUCO, all this stuff. And the gist of the tweet was like there was a high level, I think it was like Calvin versus somebody in a men's game, and they're like, this is a grown man game, like the and grown women game in D3, like how good the quality of basketball is. And I feel, you kind of talked about in player development, the simple's getting lost. Well, I feel like that's gotten lost too, is to how good you have to be to play at some of these levels. Everybody sees D1 and all this, right? South Carolina women's and Duke on the men's side or whatever, but like how good that basketball is. So I just kind of wanted you to talk about some of your experiences D3 and what you're seeing with your players moving on and kind of the feedback they give you as to when they go to school. They're like, hey, coach, this is hard, this is tough.
Yeah, so I think I've heard from some of my former players that have gone on to play at the Division III level that what we do at Whitman-Hanson like kind of prepares them for that level, which was kind of like a breath of fresh air when some of them came back and told me that. But like you said, like D3 is no slouch. Like D3 is legit basketball. And I think we go back to like the whole like social media part of the game of today's world is nobody wants these D3 looks, right? Everybody's like I should be a scholarship player and blah 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 blah, and I'm gonna go on these unofficial visits, and they just kind of like poo poo the Division III level, and it's like I try to tell you know my players that are looking to play in college, like you better not shoot down any Division III offer that you get, because first of all, like number one, like the coaching fraternity, like everybody talks. So if you're getting recruited by a school, around Boston, Division III or Division II, a Division II school that might be interested in you might talk to the Division III school, the Division III coach, and say like, hey, like, what do you think about this player, whatever. And if you don't acknowledge that interest from that coach, he's going to talk about it, right? Like, he's like, hey, like, yeah, I texted Sally and Sally didn't text me back. Sally ghosted me. Like, that's not a good look on you, right? So, to continue to keep those lines of communication open. Um, but I think the other big issue is like the whole NIL thing. And, with all these kids jumping from school to school, you might not have opportunities at those levels, right? So like you might not only get Division III looks, and that's okay because Division III is legit basketball. And if you go to a Division III school and then your coach all of a sudden gets a job at a D2 school, he might just bring you with him, right? And now you're playing at Division II. So it's like you never want to close doors on opportunities. Um, and it's like, and even as a teacher, right, in my school, like I'll talk to some certain kids and they'll be like, "Oh, like, Mr. Costa, you played basketball in college? Like, where'd you play?" And I'm like, "Oh, I played at Framingham State." They're like, "Oh, what division's that?" I was like, "Oh, three." And they're like, "Three? That's it?" And I'm like, "Dude," I'm like, you wouldn't be able to step on the floor at a Division III school. Like, it's just everybody wants the glitz and the glam, and like they all think that they can play at D1, in D2, but the reality is like you might not even be able to play at D3, right? So it all goes back to those things that we talked about, like being tough. Can you guard? Can you make shots? Can you handle the ball? Like those are all things that Division 3 players do really well. Because the reality of it is like the difference between like when I played, anyways, I think it might be a little bit different now because the game's changed so much. Is like, but like back in what was it, 2004 to 2008, like really only difference between those three levels was like the size of the kids, right? So like the skills were basically the same. It was just the size. Like you look at a D3 school compared to like a Division 1 school, like the D1 kids are just huge, right? But the D3 kids are just as skilled and can shoot and handle the ball and finish just as good as the Division 3 kids.
So, in the second half of every episode, we like to focus on a specific topic with our guests. And Todd and I were going back and forth on this actually earlier in the week. And we thought this would be a great topic for you, just as a team that's in the playoffs and prep and preparing it, etc. So, we really wanted to focus on kind of watching film and preparation and getting your team ready and using film as a tool. To start, when you're putting together a scouting, we're going to take this in a couple directions, but let's talk about putting together a scouting report on an opponent. What are some of the main elements you include? What are some of the most important things? And maybe in your mind, maybe what are some overrated things others may include in their scouts?
Um, so with our scouting reports, like obviously we do personnel stuff. We'll do, who the starters are, who comes off the bench. We look at like strengths of each player. And then we look at, how we're going to defend them, right? So, um, if it's a shooter and she's coming off a ball screen, we're probably going to, either blitz it or, fight over the top, hedge and recover. Want to make them a driver instead of, be there on the catch, run them off the line, those sorts of things. So we do, obviously personnel stuff. Then we'll look at, some of their tendencies on offense, what they like to do, what they're looking for, out of some of their sets. Um, defensively, what do they like to do? Are they a run and jump team? Do they pack it in? Are they primarily a zone team? And then we break it down into keys. Like, what are the keys? What do we have to do to get this job done? And a lot of times it's like the things that I mentioned, like containing the ball, boxing out, rebounding, limiting turnovers. Just seems like all the keys to every game is kind of like the same thing, right? It's like, all right, the most successful teams do these things, and this is what we need to do. In terms of like the scouting report, like that's what we try to focus on. Some of the things that I think are a little bit um, unnecessary is really like breaking down like all the quick hitters, right? It's like they run 14 flat, right? Okay, this is what it is. This is like the majority of it. If it's like a certain thing, like a concept, like the emotion offense, like I might, like now in the state tournament, like, one of the teams that we're playing next, they run this motion offense. So we'll go through on how we're going to defend that certain thing. But like the quick hitters and like the baseline out of bounds things, like we don't really need to focus too much on that. But the conceptual stuff, we definitely look at. And then also too, like tendencies, like if we're watching film and they run the same play, the first play of the game, right? Like we'll defend that. We'll watch that and be like, hey, this is what they like to do on the first play. Watch this back screen or whatever it is. But that's the gist.
So when you're presenting it to your team, right? How do you find the balance of like, okay, we have to show this and so we know it, and maybe too much, and then how are you assessing when they know it, right?
Yeah. So I think during the week, at least in Massachusetts, we usually play twice a week. So we play Tuesdays and Fridays. So we'll do we'll do like some film sessions before practice. Um, if the game's on Tuesday, we'll do some film on Sunday and Monday before practice so they can see it. Then we'll take that stuff onto the floor so they walk through it so they know what it looks like on the floor. Um, but then in terms of like our scout and how we go over our scout, um, I had a young well I have a young team this year, and we'll pretty much have the same team next year. At the beginning of the year, like we do all the scout stuff on personnel, and like I felt like they weren't really absorbing like what they needed to know, because if 14's a shooter and everybody knows it in pregame, but then we go out and we let 14 shoot the ball, you know, 4 times in the first quarter, right? Catch and shoot wide open, like that's an issue. So what I started to do was everybody had to I'd give them the scouting report before the game. So if the game was on a Tuesday, I give it to them on Monday, and they had to memorize their matchup. And then when we get into pregame on Tuesday, I didn't have the scout up on the board, but I would just say, "Hey, Todd, tell me your matchup. What's number 2 do?" And then they had to, spit it back to me so everybody knew. And then if you weren't a starter, um, you needed to know, everybody, not like memorize, but like you needed to have read the scouting report before, we get into the scout on Tuesday. Um, because I'm big on not only, the people on the floor communicating with each other, but, the people on the bench should be communicating too. So if, 2 is a shooter, everybody on the bench should be like, hey, you know, shooter, 2 is a shooter, like giving your teammates reminders um, on the bench so we're all on the same page.
So the another piece of this that I always find interesting, you kind of talked about it, but is personnel. And it's one of those things where like I at least I feel like I want to give them a gist of the personnel, but I don't want to like over give it to them. Sometimes I have each kid scout a specific kid. What do you feel is like that balance between knowing the personnel, but also knowing maybe too much about the personnel?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of like the personnel piece of it, like I think you just need to know the type of player they are, right? Like, um, is your matchup majority a driver? Are they looking to hunt the paint? Are they looking to attack the rim, or are they primarily a shooter? Are they going to be on the perimeter? Um, just so we know, like when we close out, how are we going to close out? Like I think that's the biggest thing, right? It's like if you're guarding a shooter, your closeouts have to be harder, right? But if you're guarding a driver, you might close out a little bit shorter, making sure that, I preach no middle. So like getting your feet right so that we can, contain the ball and not get beat middle. So I think those things are like the big things. In terms of like, tendencies, like, hey, this girl likes to, cross over twice and then do an in and out. Like, I think that's a little bit too much. I think it's just knowing the type of player that um, you're guarding. I think everybody needs to know that. Like, if it's a post player, hey, this girl is only going to shoot over her right shoulder. She's always coming back. She's always coming back to her right shoulder. So make sure that when she catches the ball, you force her the other way. Those sorts of things.
So let's flip it to now when you're watching your own team. Okay. You're watching, you kind of see what happened that day, um, you know, or you're looking at your own team against what somebody else would do, right? Knowing your strengths. What are you kind of looking for? And then, how are you sending that to your team to say, hey, in this game, these are the things we need to do, whether it's video examples, whether it's on the scout, you talked about your keys. So kind of how are you disseminating that information to your team?
So usually after every game, like coaches and I will break down, the game, and we'll create some playlists for them to look at. Um, we don't always we clip good and bad stuff. Like I think you need to see the good stuff just as much as you need to see the bad stuff. So um, if we have good plays, whether it's like a transition play, outlet, get it ahead, get a quick layup, get a quick score, we'll clip that just so we can, emphasize that, like, hey, like we need to keep doing this. In terms of like sharing the ball and ball movement, like we relate it to baseball and softball. Like we don't want singles, like one pass to a shot. We want doubles, triples, home runs. Like we want that ball popping around, seeing both sides of the floor, making that one more pass. So, if we have that in the game, we'll clip those. And then we'll clip the bad things. Like I always, that was like one of the differences I would say with, the girls and the boys side is like in the film session, if I clip something, like it was almost like I was attacking, the girl, right? And it's like, no, 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 like I'm not attacking you. Like I'm showing you this because we need to get better. And just because I'm clipping you because you did it, everybody does it, So it's like I'm not just clipping you to throw you under the bus. Like I'm just clipping this so we can all get better. So like that goes with like the communication piece on, the difference between doing film with the girls and the boys. Um, but so we'll clip good things and bad things. We use Huddle, so like you can comment on the clip or whatever. I'll sometimes have, the girls respond like, "Hey, like, you turned it over here. Like, what were you thinking? What were you looking at?" And then we can kind of have a little dialogue that way. Um, Another thing that I do with the girls sometimes is I won't I won't break down the film. I'll put them in groups and they'll do like a little film session where they have to do like we call it a start, stop, and continue. So like I want you to clip three things that we're not doing right now that we need to start doing. I want you to clip, three things that um, we're doing that are bad that we need to stop doing, whether that's, fading away on an offensive rebound or not going through contact or, um, not jumping to the ball, when passes are made. So three things that we need to stop doing, and then three things that we do well that we need to continue to do. So kind of like what I was referencing before, like whether it's sharing the ball or running hard in transition, with a throw ahead pass or whatever. Um, so those are some exercises that we use that I think have been pretty beneficial. Um, but yeah.
So we wanted to actually, Todd, this is you. Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, well, we wanted to give you your chance to just kind of talk about anything you want. It's your second time out. You can um talk about your team, your family, your program, something you think is important to you, a cause, whatever it may be. Give us a little bit more insight on basketball in here, whatever it may be. It's your loose 30-second time out to go ahead and drop some knowledge on us. Go.
I don't know. I think like, coming from, a situation where like I, was in the AAU game for a little bit, coaching, directing, both the boys and the girls side. Um, it's just like the AAU stuff is just, it's a lot. Like I think, thinking back to when I was, playing AAU back in like 97, 98, like where I'm from in the South Shore of Massachusetts, like there was two teams, right? There was two teams. You had to make, one of the two teams. And if you didn't play AAU. Now it's like, it's just so watered down and there's so many teams. And if you don't make a team, then, you know, Joe Schmo's dad can make a team, right? So there's just a lot. And I think with that and like AAU being such like a money grab now for people to make money, like I just think it's hurting the game of basketball. Like it's hurting the the quality of the product. And like just think about it. Like you and I say this to my team all the time. Like just because you play AAU, that doesn't mean you're getting better. Like you're practicing twice a week for like an hour and a half, right? So you're in the gym an hour and a half, and then you're on the weekends, you're playing four games, right? Essentially, maybe more, right? Maybe less. But like in those games, like how many shots are you taking? Right? How many shots are you taking in those 4 games? Maybe 20, right? 5 shots a game. That's if you're, you know, obviously if you're a stud, you're probably taking more than 20 shots. But like essentially, like you take 5 shots a game, that's 20 shots for the weekend, right? Is that enough to get better? No, right? So like I just think it's like kids are like, oh, I play AAU and I do all these things. I'm like getting better. Like maybe you are outside of that, but like all that time that's spent on AAU, it's just a lot. Um, and then you look at like the difference between like American basketball and like the European game is the Europeans do it the opposite, right? They're practicing 4 or 5 days a week and playing 1 or 2 games on the weekend, right? And that's why their skills are so much better than ours right now, is because we're not focused on the skill development. We're focused on just playing, right? And obviously, this benefits to AAU too. But I just think in terms of like the quality and product of like the player, I think it's a little um, subpar.
All right, let's move into what we call quick hitters, just kind of rapid fire questions. So, Coach, we know you're very pretty adept at getting steals in college, right? You had a knack for getting some steals. So, who's the best thief in basketball? Could be now, could be all time. Someone you like, someone you enjoyed, modeled your game after, maybe.
I mean, growing up, I was always a big Gary Payton fan. Like I had Gary Payton sneakers, like the glove,
Yeah,
like that was the guy.
that's
So
it.
yeah.
That's a good choice.
That is-
That's a good one. Did you didn't talk as
Hold on,
you didn't
hold on
talk
a
as much as DP.
1 second. Sorry.
So we know you're from the Boston, New England, Massachusetts area, so we couldn't get through the episode without talking about the Celtics.
Yep.
Favorite Celtic coach?
Right now, my favorite Celtic is Derek White. Like I think Derek White is like my perfect Celtic. Like I think he just does everything well. Like defends, shot maker, high IQ. So right now it's definitely Derek White. Overall, my favorite Celtic. Um, I mean, when KG came to the Celtics, like I was all about KG. Like just the energy that he brought. Changing the culture. Um, just hard not to like KG.
No doubt. Favorite seafood in New England. What's your favorite seafood? What are you going with?
Seafood. I'm actually not a huge seafood guy. I do dabble a little bit, but if I was gonna pick one seafood, I'd have to go some grilled salmon.
Ooh, there you go.
Yep, yep.
I don't know how we've gotten through a couple of hundred episodes without asking anybody this, but what's your favorite or lucky number?
My lucky number uh is actually 4. Like 4 is my lucky number. Don't ask me why. I guess just growing up, I liked the way it looked, so I just would always pick 4. Um, but actually, my I wasn't even 4 in college. That's actually a fun fact. Um, in college, we had no single digit numbers. So
Really?
so I was 12. Just random. I was 12 when I was in college. So, but
That's hard.
4 is
That's
my favorite
hard.
number.
That's hard because you think you'd run out of the numbers at some point if you don't have any singles, right? Like,
I know. I know. I don't know. It's just maybe all the single numbers got stolen. I don't know. We just didn't
yeah.
have any single numbers.
All right, fishing, golf, or taking a nap.
um, well, I have 3 kids now, so taking naps is kind of just not a
Right.
thing.
That's out, right?
And my kids are all,
Probably
my oldest,
golf and
my old,
fishing eliminates that too, right?
yeah, my yeah, my oldest is 4, and my youngest is actually just turned 3 months today. So
Boy.
naps are not a thing. but golf definitely. I love golf. I'm not like great at it, but I just like being out there. Um, I think eventually, like, I think golf is something that I want to try to get good at, and try to keep that competitive fire going. Fishing, I'm not a fisher. I don't have patience for that. I can't be sitting down there waiting for a fish. So um, definitely, if I could take a nap, I would love to take a nap. But golf is probably the best thing on that list right now.
With how young your kids are, coach, you don't have too many naps in your future.
I know, seriously.
All right, last one. Maybe just something you'd like to see implemented in the high school game in your area.
So one of the things um, over every Christmas break, I try to take my team away to try to build some team chemistry and those sorts of things. So like sometimes some years we go to Florida. This year we came up to New York for a couple games, and one of the things that was interesting is like the whole like advancing of the ball like on a timeout. So like you know uh, made basket or whatever, call a timeout, they could advance it to half court, kind of like the NBA. We don't have that in Massachusetts. Like we've had a shot clock for a while. Like I don't even remember. Even when I was in high school, we had a shot clock. I know that's kind of new to some high schools in the country.
We went
But I think, yeah, but I think that's one of the things that I think could improve the game is that end of the game thing where you advance the ball a little bit.
Coach, well, we can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's always good to talk to coaches from different areas of the country and kind of learn how things are very similar in all spots, but also different and get different perspectives, right? Because me and John are kind of here in Illinois. Well, as we don't see too many games out your way, but we're definitely going to be following you and watching you. So can't thank you enough for joining us today.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys for having me on. I think what you guys are doing is awesome. Love talking hoops, love talking shop. So if I could be on again, just let me know.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the After the Timeout podcast in partnership with the IBCA. Please be sure to rate us on whatever platform you are listening and give us a 5-star rating. For more show content and updates, please follow us on Twitter at After the Timeout. As always, thank you for listening. Tune in next time for more content on the court, off the court, and anything in between.